Hello everyone. So it was announced a few days ago that the geniuses of the Victorian Labor government are going to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 12 as part of the extreme far left's ongoing love of criminality. Needless to say, the Greens and other social injustice advocates wanted it raised to 14. A prominent campaigner for these changes has been Maggie Munn, another one of these inner-city dwelling white people who identify as black and profess to speak on behalf of Indigenous people. I call them white people because if you take a look at an actual Indigenous woman, a few examples here, and then compare it to the likes of Lydia Thorpe, Linda Burney or Maggie Munn, you can see plainly with your own lying eyes that there's actually not much Indigenous person going on there. Lydia Thorpe looks more Mediterranean than anything, and I can't see any Indigenous blood in Maggie Munn whatsoever. I'm not pointing that out to take a swipe at their race in any way. It's to take a swipe at the levels of fakery these fake blacks are capable of. Anyway, as part of the announcement of the raising of the age of criminal responsibility in Victoria, the ABC, that's the Aboriginal bum-licking channel, had cognitively impaired blacktivist Maggie Munn on to talk about said legislative changes.
10 years old, that's grade 5, right? So you've got a child who's probably still watching Bluey being locked up and imprisoned.
But you see, it's not their Bluey watching activities that they're being locked up for. They're being locked up for what they did after watching Bluey, where they broke into someone's house, threatened them with a knife, stole their money, went and bought some meth, then stole a ute and drove it down a footpath, killing a baby in a pram and their mother. I say that because it should be obvious to anyone who isn't a moron, that's people that wouldn't include you, that courts don't lock up children unless the crime is particularly heinous, and or said child is a completely out of control incorrigible from whom society needs to be protected. But no, according to you, they're just poor innocents who watch Bluey with their big puppy eyes, no doubt.
And unfortunately, because of, all of the ongoing impacts of colonisation and racist laws and policies and things like that.
Name a single racist law, Flopsy. There isn't one. Admittedly, there are racist policies, just not any that work against blacks. Only racist policies that give blacks preferential treatment or extra benefits that aren't afforded to whites. Now, I can get on board with colonisation being responsible for particular crimes committed by Aborigines. For example, home invasion and car theft. That's because Indigenous Australians never had houses or cars before colonisation and wouldn't have them now if it weren't for colonisation. So colonisation must be responsible for all the car thefts and break-ins, right? Or maybe, just maybe, there's a reason for delinquency that has nothing to do with Whitey.
What have we learned? What have you learned?
Oh, look, I think the main thing that I've learned is whatever we're being shown in the media back in the cities is not the reality of what it's like on the ground in Alice Springs. And I think that's really important to mention.
I totally agree. Look, I think a consistent theme throughout the week, no matter who we talk to, black, white, street people, business owners, was that it's these kids that are out of control, and they all blame who? One people.
Yeah, I mean, they blame the parents, which is like the same across pretty much any culture or any community. When the parents don't look after the kids, there's issues.
Where are the parents? They're down in the park and drinking metho and stuff like that.
That's a lot of bullshit. Cut the fucking parents off the fucking pension. Get the kids off the street. Mother and father should have taken the stupid kids back home where they belong to, where they've been fucking bred and born,
Their parents need to be there. There needs to be other things for them to do, keep them occupied. Children are naughty. Sometimes parents need a helping hand as well, too, to provide whatever care they can. I mean, after all, the saying goes, it takes a community to raise a child, and we're living that literally right now as the whole community is trying to band together to try and raise these children.
And obviously here, the delinquency rate, how it's happening is happening on another level that's impacting the whole community.
Lack of parental responsibility and guidance. And who are the parents of Aboriginal kids? Well, it's not Whitey, is it? It's other Aborigines. It's not racist laws and policies. It's Aborigines who don't give a fuck about their own children. They'll never get out of this hole if they continue to blame Whitey for everything. The only road to self-betterment has to be travelled by yourselves.
The majority of those kids are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids. In Victoria, we're seeing a massive increase in multicultural kids coming before the courts and being sentenced, and kids from refugee and migrant backgrounds as well, and that's really concerning.
Oh, well, at least we can now see the motivation for your advocacy, because you identify as an Aborigine. You want Aboriginal kids to not be responsible for the crimes they commit. Of course, these kids aren't before the courts because they're black. They're before the courts because of the crimes they've committed. And it's people like you, Maggie Munn, that are the very reason so many of these kids are committing crimes, because it's people like you that are the loudest voices in not teaching these kids to be compelled to take responsibility for their actions. I mean, imagine if armed bank robbery was to be punished by telling them that they don't have to go to jail. Oh, and here's a new car, so you don't have to be burdened with catching the bus because it's Whitey's fault you don't have all the money you need. If that were the punishment for armed bank robbery, everyone would be doing it. And how are they being rewarded for committing crimes against their fellow Australians, Gary, I hear you ask? Here's the government's response to the Alice Springs crime wave, released on the 24th of January this year. Justice reinvestment. $99 million for First Nations justice measures, including $81.5 million in funding for up to 30 community-led justice reinvestment initiatives across Australia, with Alice Springs identified as a priority site. Read between the lines of that one. Predominantly white Australia is going to have $99 million of their taxes spent on Aboriginal child criminals being immune from Australian common law and instead being subject to community-led, in other words, tribal law, by other Aborigines who have already proven themselves to not take responsibility for their own youth. Makes perfect sense. Indigenous health. $19 million for First Nations health infrastructure projects in Central Australia, in partnership with the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress. Oh, so another $19 million of taxpayer money to provide care for the perpetrators of the Alice Springs crime wave. And we don't even get to say how our money should be spent. That will be up to the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress to decide. Community safety and support. $20 million for Gap Youth Centre and other youth services in Alice Springs to continue to provide hands-on support. $15 million provided to the Northern Territory Government under the Family, Domestic and Sexual Violence National Partnership Agreement to support family, domestic and sexual violence responses and ensure women and children, but not men, can access the support they need to live free of violence. Indigenous housing. Another $100 million for housing and essential services in Northern Territory homelands, with an immediate boost of $25 million and a further $75 million allocated in 2023-24. So the punishment for the youth crime wave is going to be recreation centres, not jail, and replacement houses for the houses that they were already gifted that they completely trashed.
We've got little kids being held responsible for things that they can't quite understand, and that's really, really outrageous, and people should be as outraged and as furious as I am about this. At no point do the advocates calling for this reform ever want to diminish or dismiss the concerns and experiences of people who have suffered harm here.
Bullshit. When people are unable to get justice for the crimes committed against them, regardless of the age of the perpetrator, that's completely diminishing their suffering. And it's right there in the government's response. How much money is being allocated to the smashed windows and stolen goods of businesses? None. How much money is allocated for the medical costs and trauma counselling for the victims of violent assaults? None. How much money is the government allocating to replace the vehicles that people have had stolen from them? None. No, it's just all rewards for the perpetrators, nothing for the victims. And what are you doing, Maggie Munn, to protect the victims? Absolutely nothing. In fact, quite the reverse. You want to leave the perpetrators on the street so they can do it again.
But what we're asking folks to consider is that the accountability is proportionate. And when you have a child, a little kid, who doesn't quite understand the gravity of what it is that they've done and doesn't understand perhaps the long-standing impacts of their behaviour, we can't allow for them to be sentenced to a prison cell that just completely degrades them and doesn't offer them an opportunity to to consider what it is that they've done and make up for the harm that they've caused. Accountability for that harm can exist outside of a prison cell.
Yeah, it's funny. That's where your interview ended, without any explanation as to how that accountability can exist outside of a prison cell and what that accountability might even mean. You know, the idea of prison is to drive home in the strongest possible terms the concept of accountability. Oh, and by the way, perpetrators of crimes are supposed to have their dignity diminished. That's part of the punishment. You regain your dignity by atonement. In the case of these kids, who by your own admission don't understand the gravity of what they've done, that understanding has to be forced upon them. Oh, and if there's anything that's going to give them the opportunity to consider what they've done, it's some time in prison.
Are you scared to go to juvie?
No.
What is that?
Who's that?
Oh, you got brothers there?
Yeah.
There is no real deterrence. They're not afraid of going to jail. They're not afraid of the police. That the system here is designed to protect them instead of the community. That's what we're hearing from people here, which is unfortunate.
So here's Maggie Munn trying to play the "oh, these poor kids" card and how degrading it would be for them. But you listen to the kids speak with their own voices and they don't even care. They've got brothers there. The worst thing for them is that it's boring. Probably because they're not being given purpose. They're just being given Xboxes. 8 hours a day breaking rocks, then they might think, shit, I don't want to come back here. I'm sure many of you guys have seen those boot camp reality shows where they make kids do it tough. It's funny how more often than not, it seems to straighten them right out. Some tough love. Not the kind of no punishment whatsoever horseshit this Maggie Munn comes out with. That last clip from Avi Yemeni's video I've taken snippets from summed it up succinctly.
The system here is designed to protect them instead of the community. That's what we're hearing from people here, which is unfortunate.
And that's the root of what's really wrong. The system is designed to protect the perpetrator, not the victim. And that's because the system of identity politics has made all Aborigines victims, when in fact some of them are perpetrators.